Alrighty, thank you everyone for joining us. We are very excited to launch the first of 4 Mobility Monday webinars. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our Facebook page after the Facebook live stream has ended. We will be reserving time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A, and we welcome you to add any questions that you have about the presentation, about Vision Zero, to the chat box, and we'll be collecting those questions and answering them at the end. With some of the housekeeping items out of the way, I want to formally welcome you to the Mobility Monday webinar series. My name is Jana Schwartz, and I am a senior planner with Circulate San Diego. I'm joined by my planning team today, which is made up of Danielle Berger, Angelica Rocha, and Octavio Garcia. Mobility Monday is made possible through a grant funded through the California Office of Traffic Safety and in partnership with the County of San Diego's Health and Human Services. Before I turn the presentation over to Danielle to get us into today's subject matter, I will be launching a quick poll to see who is joining us today. So let me go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so you should be seeing a poll in front of you, and if you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to add your response that fits you best into the chat. But we just want to know who you're representing. So whatever best fits you, please select that category. I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds longer. Okay, I will end the poll. And I ran to the issue again. Do any of my counterparts see what the responses are?
Yep, Jana, I see the poll results. It looks like we have 3 participants who represent those who work in a transportation related profession, and then 4 folks who are community advocates. So a nice mix of folks on this webinar.
Excellent. Okay, so I will close the poll. And that was a perfect introduction because I will now happily hand it over to Danielle, who will kick us off for the Mobility Monday Vision Zero and Safe Streets for All webinar series. So Danielle, let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Hi, everyone. As Jana mentioned, my name is Danielle Berger, and I am the Director of Planning here at Circulate. And I am excited to present to you guys what I have been referring to as a Vision Zero 101 course. So an introduction to what Vision Zero is as an overall strategy to help end traffic violence, as well as how it's being applied in the city of San Diego. So what Circulate does, if you're unfamiliar with our organization, we are a local 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to create excellent mobility choices and vibrant, healthy neighborhoods. The way we achieve our mission is through 2 main avenues. One, planning and educational programs, which include mobility assessments, safety campaigns, and various community engagement strategies, as well as our policy and advocacy work around safe streets, transit, and sustainable growth. Next slide, please. So Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries within a period of 10 years. This is a strategy that first was implemented in Sweden in the late 1990s and has gained traction across the world and across the United States with cities taking the pledge that no loss of life is acceptable and death on streets does not have to be part of modern life. Vision Zero is implemented in a variety of ways, primarily that fall into the 3 categories of engineering, education, and enforcement. This presentation will give a very high level of different types of strategies that cities, including San Diego, have used or can use to implement Vision Zero in their local jurisdictions. Next slide. So what's the problem? As you can imagine, there is an increased number of pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities for the most part year over year. There was a decline in the early 1990s and early 2000s in pedestrian fatalities, but have sharply been on the rise since then. The graph that you see here at the bottom, it maxes out at 2018, but one can suspect that the numbers are increasing into 2019 and into 2021. This data is, I would say, not surprising to most people, particularly the uptick trend after the year 2009. This is for a variety of reasons: the rise of cell phones, both in terms of a distraction device in the car, as well as people walking and biking on the street, larger cars and SUVs becoming the predominant personal vehicle on our roadways, and a number of other factors, including increased VMTs and things that just lead to unsafe streets. Next slide, please, Jana. So one of the biggest issues with increased in both cars on the road and distraction is speed. So this is a really great infographic that shows, based on the speed that a vehicle is traveling, a person's likelihood to survive a collision. So as you can see, a person has a 90% chance of surviving a collision with a vehicle at 20 miles an hour. That drops to 60% chance of surviving a collision at 30 miles an hour and drops down to only 20% at 40 miles an hour. These statistics, this is for an average individual. When we start looking at vulnerable road users, such as children, older adults, or people in the disabled community, it greatly increases the risk of having a fatal collision. Next slide, please. So continuing on to really what the challenges is with Vision Zero and what these strategies hope to solve are two things. One is safety, both real and perceived. Safety is the primary barrier from getting people to walk or bike, not only to a primary destination, but also to things like transit, shared mobility devices, carpool lots, that sort of thing. In addition, things like speeding cars, missing sidewalks, unsafe crossings, and inadequate bikeways are a few other common concerns that prevent people from walking and biking more. So there's safety, and then there's infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as I had mentioned earlier, Vision Zero is a global network of cities, and this map shows the cities that have pledged to be Vision Zero cities across the country. So you'll see there's a cluster of them along the coast, both east and west, and then we have various cities strewn across the central United States. So this is a growing movement, and it's one of Circulate's missions to help cities, not only locally in San Diego County, but all across Southern California, become recognized as Vision Zero cities. Next slide. So what makes a Vision Zero city? This would be a city that meets one of the following minimum criteria. Number one, a clear goal of eliminating traffic fatalities and severe injuries has been established. The mayor has publicly and officially committed to a Vision Zero commitment. A Vision Zero plan or strategy is in place, or the mayor has committed to doing so in a clear time frame. Usually this is 10 years. It's a 10-year commitment from when the city becomes a Vision Zero to when these strategies are implemented with the goal of reaching zero fatalities. And key departments, including transportation, public health, and the mayor's office, are leading these initiatives. Next slide, please. This is an example of a Vision Zero resolution that a city can adopt should they choose to become a Vision Zero city. It's important for the resolution to gain support of elected leadership. In addition, many cities start by adopting a Vision Zero resolution and then work across the various departments to develop a Vision Zero action plan to support the implementation. Next slide. So now what we're going to get into is sort of what are some of the strategies or solutions that cities can implement based on various challenges that they experience locally. And I will say that Vision Zero strategies are not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's very specific to the infrastructure and programmatic challenges that a particular jurisdiction faces. So as I mentioned that there were, two sorts of problems, infrastructure and then programmatic, there's also two approaches to designing safe system solutions. One is to develop and create safe, smart users. So that would be residents and folks using the roadways. And then the other approach is through safe and smart design. Next slide, please. Safe and smart users. So what this really falls under is the education criteria of how Vision Zero can be implemented. So this presentation that we're giving you here is one strategy to educate residents and community members about what safe street use looks like. So things like riding with the flow of traffic, wearing a helmet, stopping at stop signs, using the correct hand signals, using lights at night when appropriate, wearing bright reflective clothing, remembering to put your phone away, not to ride on the sidewalk unless it's necessary, and just general education about how to be a safe roadway user is an important part of the Vision Zero strategy. Next slide, please. And so the next strategy is safe and smart design, and this is focused on engineering and infrastructure improvements. So it's kind of that be the change that you want to see. And if you create safe infrastructure, you will then provide an opportunity for the smart, safe roadway users to use your infrastructure appropriately. So the primary concern or focus of smart, safe design is to protect vulnerable users. So this includes people of all ages and ability, children, older adults. Those are who Vision Zero infrastructure improvements should be focused on. There's also a focus on complete streets strategies and designing roadways for all modes, so public transit, walking, biking, scootering, and other shared mobility devices, as well as personal vehicles. Third, as I showed earlier in that infographic about speed and fatalities, the primary goal is to also slow down cars. Next slide, please. So these next set of slides I will be presenting are just a handful of infrastructure improvements that have been implemented across the country. And I believe all of them also been implemented in the city of San Diego. So this first one is a protected or a separated bike lane. 50% of people are interested in cycling, but don't due to safety concerns. The primary safety concern of people riding the bike is that they are uncomfortable riding with traffic. Only 10% of riders are defined as confident roadway users. So these are people who are comfortable riding with traffic, regardless of there being a designated bike lane on the roadway. So if we want to get more people biking throughout our cities, we really need to design the safest, most approachable type of infrastructure for all ages and abilities. So this image we have here, I believe, is the San Diego River Trail. Next slide, please. So raised crosswalks is another common infrastructure improvement. This one focuses on pedestrians. And what this does, it's shown here in this graphic on the right in yellow. It is intended to increase pedestrian visibility as well as slow down traffic and act like a sort of speed hump. And it implicitly gives priority to pedestrians. So the pedestrian is raised higher at the crosswalk into the driver's visibility view shed so they can see pedestrians more easily. Next slide. Narrow traffic lanes is another great strategy to reduce traffic speeds, and this is often coupled with a number of other infrastructure improvements as part of complete street strategies. And so the reasoning behind narrowing traffic lanes is that the wider the lane is, the higher the speeds are. By reducing the traffic lanes, the traffic lane width, I should say, not only do you slow speeds, but you create additional space for things like bike lanes, transit priority lanes, wider sidewalks, shared use paths, those sort of things. And this graphic here, oh, can you go back one, Jana? This graphic on the right just shows the relationship between traffic speed and lane width. So as you can see, as the lane width increases, so does traffic speed. Next slide, please. Lead pedestrian intervals. This is a fancy word for pedestrian priority crossings. And so this is, you've probably seen this when you've crossed the light. The ped signal turns to the walk sign while it holds the traffic at the red light. What this does is it allows pedestrians to get into the crosswalk before the traffic starts flowing either left or right through the green light. What this does is it gives pedestrians a head start to crossing the intersection and increases the visibility to motorists. Next slide, please. Adequate street lighting. This is an infrastructure improvement that I think often gets overlooked in Vision Zero strategies really across the country, especially in places where winter and the dark nights start very early. Nighttime visibility, particularly around schools and transit stops, is incredibly important, and making sure that there is adequate pedestrian scale lighting is a critical component to not only improving the real and perceived safety around walking and biking, but increasing people's propensity to use those modes. Next slide, please. Potholes. It's my favorite. Potholes are dangerous, and they present the biggest safety issue to micromobility devices such as scooters, e-bikes, and then just, of course, regular bikes. This pothole on the right-hand side here is shown in the middle of a sharrow. So this is not something that you would typically, pay attention to if you are walking on the sidewalk, or really if you're driving your car, but these can become serious safety concerns, especially at night for bicyclists and shared micromobility users. Back-in angle parking is another strategy that can be included as part of a complete streets corridor redesign. What it does is it greatly increases the visibility of cyclists to passing cars. So the idea is that if a vehicle is pulling out of a parking spot forward instead of reverse, they are much more likely to see not only oncoming vehicles, but as well cyclists who are riding in the bike lanes provided. Next slide. All right, so this RFBs, HOCs, and PHBs are all types of beacons that are used to improve pedestrian crossing. So RFB stands for rectangular flashing beacon. A HOC is a type of hybrid crosswalk, and a PHB is a pedestrian hybrid beacon. All of these strategies and devices are different methods to use a series of flashing lights and pedestrian activated buttons to let motorists know that there is a pedestrian about to cross. So as it says here, lights make drivers more aware of pedestrians in the crosswalk. Next slide. Mid-block crossings. So this is a common strategy in areas where city blocks are very long and the distance between marked intersections or traffic controlled intersections is very long. Oftentimes mid-block crossings will include a variety of features, including the beacons that I just presented, high visibility crosswalks, median refuge, and other indicators to motorists that this is a designated location for pedestrians to cross. Next slide, please. So this is the a couple examples of local improvements, and I'm actually going to turn this over to my colleague Angelica Rocha to continue this presentation.
Great, thanks, Danielle. So as Danielle shared, infrastructure improvements, we wanted to bring it home and provide a little bit of some local examples of Vision Zero infrastructure. So on the left-hand side, we see the 6th Avenue protected bike lanes, which are part of the greater downtown mobility plan. And this will be a network, a safe mobility network in the downtown area. And the 6th Avenue corridor was part of the first phase of development. On the right-hand side, we see a crossing at 50th and University in City Heights. University Avenue is one of the most fatal corridors in the city of San Diego, and this improvement really enhances the pedestrian crossing in this particular neighborhood. Next slide. And so one thing that's really important for us here at Circulate is that we understand safety on our streets is a shared responsibility. And we have a coalition of partners that includes planners, engineers, city staff, other advocacy organizations, public health professionals, educators, and residents. And the Vision Zero Coalition began in 2015 as the Vision Zero Task Force, and really was aimed at providing the framework for the city of San Diego to incorporate the Vision Zero Action Plan. Today, especially as other jurisdictions continue to announce Vision Zero commitments, we now have members from all over San Diego County. You can see a number of their logos on the right-hand side. And really our goal is kind of this shared effort to reduce the number of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities to zero, promote safe street design, advocate collectively for infrastructure improvement projects, and really share and discuss ideas on how to increase safety on our streets. Next slide. And just a couple examples of the work that we do on top of meeting monthly as sort of this knowledge sharing resource about state and local policies. We also advocate together on the most pressing transportation related issues. For example, I've got a screenshot on the left-hand side. Last year, in the growing momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement, our local transportation advocates recognize the intersection of traffic safety and institutionalized racism. And we prepared a letter advocating for the removal of enforcement as one of the 6 E's in the City of San Diego's Vision Zero framework. And we also outlined a list of recommendations for really rethinking or reimagining police and police violence in the name of traffic safety. And this is important to Circulate and also the coalition partners that sign on to this and transportation related orgs across the nation, because Black people in the US are more likely to be killed in traffic crashes. And they are also more likely to be stopped and killed by police during routine traffic stops. And on the right-hand side was, this is an image of a crash site memorial at the site of a tragic crash that took place very recently and took the life of 3 houseless San Diego residents. So a coalition of partners really wanted to send our condolences and really bring this home, the intersection of housing and transportation related issues. And we do this as part of our Crash Not Accident campaign, a campaign to really get people to think about crashes as something that is preventable. And next slide. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jaina for a final poll.
Thanks, and thank you to both of our speakers, Danielle and Angelica. This was really a quick deep dive into Vision Zero at kind of a global level as well as a local level. Perhaps some of you are very familiar with Vision Zero, and perhaps Vision Zero is a brand new term to others. And so we really wanted to provide this as a great resource that you can carry with yourself and share with others. And it's definitely a part of Circulate's effort to continue the education about Vision Zero and everything mobility within San Diego. So with that, as Angelica mentioned, I will be launching one more poll. We are curious if you learned something new. So this is just a very quick yes or no poll, but did you learn something new from today's Mobility Monday webinar? So since it's just 2 options, I'll leave this open for about 10 more seconds. And as we do that, I will stop sharing and ask the presenters to turn on their videos. And I'll end the poll. And hopefully we learned something new. So as I mentioned, we reserved time at the end of the presentation for questions. I noticed that our chat is a little bit quiet, but perhaps you are sitting on some questions. This is not a forced conversation, but if anything was sparked during the presentation that we can help address or just have an open dialogue about, we wanted to create that space in order to do that. So because it's such a small group today, feel free to take yourself off mute, and we'd love to answer any questions that you have. So I will be quiet and check on the chat and see if anyone comes off of mute to have any questions.
And if we don't have any questions, that's fine too.
Absolutely.
Actually, I do have one question, if you don't mind.
Please.
I saw that you were at least mentioning the push button type of pedestrian crossings, and I've seen some that are automatic, and I was just kind of curious as to your opinions about those, that where the lights turn on automatically as you cross versus the pedestrian being required to walk over to a particular location to push a button.
Sure, yeah. Well, in the example of things like a pedestrian hybrid beacon or a hawk or a rectangular flashing beacon, something that stops traffic where traffic is not normally stopped, I do think it's important to have a PED activation to indicate that it's time to stop traffic. A lot of times when you see sort of the more traditional ped crossings at a regular traffic signal, those might not be ped activated for a number of reasons. It could be an older signal head and they haven't updated it to include a pedestrian activated push button. It also might be part of a signalized corridor where it really doesn't have any effect on whether or not there's a pedestrian at that location waiting to cross due to traffic control purposes.
And I'll just add, Danielle, that when COVID first began to become something that we were aware of, and we were beginning to reimagine streets and how they might better serve us in a time when we didn't know if we could touch things and we were easily transmitting, Circulate was advocating around the removal of pedestrian bag buttons. We were not successful in that advocacy, but I think it's something that our advocacy team is certainly interested in seeing continue. But as Danielle alluded to, it's a traffic control situation.
I have a follow-up question if there's nobody else that has a question. So I just don't want to take up all the time. So would Vision Zero, I mean, like here in La Mesa where I live, we do have actually quite a few of those that you mentioned, Angelica, where it's automatically allowing pedestrians to cross at some certain intervals. What about lights that basically, okay, right now the car is the priority. I mean, when you look at anything, if I pull up with a car, a pedestrian walks up and a bicyclist walks up, the car is what it usually gets acknowledged at most streets. Is there a movement to reverse that, where maybe the pedestrian gets priority, then the cyclist, and then the car?
I can jump in. I was just gonna add that, yeah, it's called a leading pedestrian interval. And that is, it basically allows the pedestrian to enter into the intersection around 3 to 7 seconds before the light turns green for the cars. And that dramatically enhances pedestrian safety because as a pedestrian, you're almost to that mid-block crossing, which allows you to be in sort of the line of sight of the car who's possibly turning right or going straight. In terms of the movement in that direction, I think a lot of it's based on traffic volumes, rate of collisions in the area or at the intersection. There's a lot of factors that are going into play for those types of investments to be made in those areas, but definitely a great Vision Zero tool. And we're always looking to encourage cities to implement those.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Angelica said, Craig, I think a great example of reimagining streets that give priorities to bicyclists and pedestrians is what the city has done with their Slow Streets initiative in response to COVID. Obviously, that was born out of a very different need of having people be able to get out of their houses and not lose their minds. But, thinking through what do residential streets or slow streets look like that, have very limited, it could be just local only traffic or closing streets off altogether. I think it's absolutely part of a Vision Zero strategy. And it's just one that, it can't be implemented on all streets, but there are absolutely streets that would qualify to have bicyclists and pedestrians be the focus.
And one more thing I will add is, Craig, I'm also a La Mesa resident, and I rode my bike this weekend to go get donuts. And as I was riding back to my home, I try and take streets that avoid traffic as much as possible, but it was along El Cajon Boulevard, so I selected to use a signalized intersection to make my left-hand turn, but the light did not recognize me, so I had to scoot as far forward for the vehicle behind me to be recognized in order for us to even have a turn. And so it's also identifying intersections where, as a bicyclist, I feel the safest to make movements, and then notifying the engineering department or whatever, public works, whatever community we're a part of, about those experiences as well. So it's very much a collaborative effort on even identifying how we can make improvements for alternate mobilities.
And I will say, as a cyclist who bikes, well, back when we did go to an office, I biked more to work than I ever drove. And I have that similar experience of certain lights not recognizing cyclists, especially if you're going early morning when there's no traffic, like in your example, that can trigger it for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we won't open up if anyone has any other questions, but you know, Craig, of course, if you have anything else, and then hi, Ricky. Good to
Hey,
see
how's it
you.
going? Good to see you.
Hey.
I actually have a question about lighting. I went to the Circulate event a while back in Pacific Beach. So as you already know, lighting is a major concern in this community. Has there been any thought to the type of lighting, not just street lighting, but the type of lighting? I know LA recently had like a street line redesign competition. I don't know if they've actually installed any of those lights that they came up with, but it was really, really awesome. And so by default, it had one, from the same pole, it had one light that kind of went over the sidewalk and one that went over the street. And the reason I say that is because even sometimes in some on some streets that have street lighting, the light is focused on the vehicles in the road and not so much on the people in the pedestrian space, quote unquote. So that's just one of those things that I got interested when I found out about that competition. It'd be great if San Diego had some cool lighting like that, because you could be right next to a street light and still feel like you're in the dark.
Yeah, I want to pick on Angelica to talk a little bit about the women's studies work, because I think that came up a ton.
Yeah. So I'll just preface by giving some examples about the work that we were doing that Ricky's referring to. So Circulate was working on a women's research study to look at the mobility challenges that women experienced after dark, and kind of evaluating street night friendliness. So what makes a street inviting to women, and how might we begin to think about non-choice transportation riders, and really how we think about changing mode shares and encouraging people to use other modes of transportation than getting in their car to do things at nighttime. And so Ricky joined us on one of these, which was great, especially as at the time he was a planning student, so brought a really great and fresh perspective to the walk. But yeah, as Ricky mentioned, it's really challenging to get street redesigns, especially in the Pacific Beach area. We've heard from council members and staffers that the Pacific Beach area has a lot of rules in terms of where street lights can be placed. And we made a bunch of recommendations to MTS in terms of how they might get more women, non-choice riders, to ride transportation at nighttime, and gave a couple examples of types of lighting. And what Ricky's referring to is kind of the difference between lighting that's really large scale at the intersections versus there's pedestrian scale lighting, so just above your head. And then there's also pedestrian scale lighting that can be sort of at your hips, which directly illuminates the landscape underneath you. So we've had conversations and given that presentation and shared those results to the MTS board, but it was mostly in terms of thinking about their transit stations. In terms of other work we've done with the city of San Diego, council members have seen that presentation and have seen that research, but we haven't had any sort of headway on advocacy around that, but always looking for new advocates to partner with to bring something like that forward. So if that's something you're passionate about, feel free to reach out to us and we can try and figure out a way to see if that's a possibility here in San Diego.
Angelica, have you or the others heard about CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design? A lot of that has lighting as a key factor, as well as obviously landscaping.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, Craig. I think what's interesting is lighting absolutely is, the nexus of those two initiatives. One thing that I do find interesting, it's cities make a pledge to become a Vision Zero city. They don't necessarily become CPTED cities. I think that that's a function of a lot of reasons, but I think that this, through the Vision Zero efforts, is a great way to blend both of those strategies.
Yeah, I think we should also figure out a way to bring that competition to San Diego. I like that idea. I'm going to check out that site. Maybe Circulate can spearhead that. Any other questions? These are great. Really adding on to, I think, what we heard in the presentation. Okay. Well, the last thing I was going to share was our emails, but if you visit the Circulate San Diego website and you go to the staff page, all of our emails are there. Feel free to contact any of us if you have any lingering questions or you want to learn more. There's also a bunch of resources on our website, so we encourage you to check that out. But with that, I really appreciate you all joining us today. And this is a 4-part series. So in Mondays to come, there's going to be topics related to older adults, as well as persons with disabilities, and more about our women mobility work that Angelica will be leading. So appreciate your time. Again, this will be available online, and we hope to see you in the future. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.